introducing him to y'all too, and we'll have other colleagues joining in a minute or two for more formal context. But I want to share it's terrific to have you here, Jacob, and looking forward to being in dialogue with yourself here in this context.
Thank you, Bobby, and wonderful to meet you. I guess Grant, and what is your name?
Yeah, Karl. Grant.
Karl.
So as context for this, do you remember your document that you were sharing around all the things that we need to do to tackle climate change? And that document, Jacob, you were sharing?
Of course, climatechange.jacobkroll.net.
Absolutely. So, you have people on the line here who might appreciate that dimensionality. One way to look at this is Grant has... I'm just giving a bit of context, Saskia. We have a new colleague in Jacob, so looking forward to introducing you to Jacob as well. But just that Grant has brought together a group of several hundred mid-career sustainability alumni from Cambridge and Oxford with an interest in climate change. And they've been collaborating to figure out all the critical things that can be done that can get collective agency against climate change. And so Grant, Jacob has been workshopping his own collaborative documentation on what can be done on climate change, and I thought y'all might find that of cross relevance.
No, great, yeah. Great to hear. I mean, unfortunately, I've been a bit distracted. We've had an incredible last 2 or 3 last month actually. We've just today had a deadline for an EU. We were actually trying to put a panel for the EU Green Week in September, October. So we just it was the 31st of July. So we've just really put that together. So hopefully we get accepted, then we can invite you in for that one in October. But I just before I digress 1 second, Jake. But then I'd love to hear about it. Bobby, what is the latest on our SOCAP your SOCAP application? Is that
they haven't told us yet? No, we don't know yet.
Oh, so they didn't come back with the voting or the results yet.
Yeah, it's still TBD. What I was going to also flag is, Jacob, we have our colleagues here arriving, and I think that it would be really interesting to for them at some point to hear about what you've been up to with your own technologies to support human thinking and human collaboration. I want to reflect that also connects to Bob, who just joined the dialogue likewise, and I want to connect to this fascinating cross-reference. Saskia and I had a conversation with Alistair this week, and Alistair, Bob, said he very much enjoyed speaking with yourself, and so I wanted to flag this interesting intersectionality. Bob, have you seen what Jacob's done, by the way? Have you met Jacob before? No? You're on mute, Bob, I think. Sorry. Bob's on mute. But when Bob's off mute, I was just going to say, because I think that, you could say that if we bridge the Alistair conversation with what I know Jacob and Bob have interest in, just as themes. Oh, now I can hear Bob. Go ahead.
Hey, hi, Jacob. Yeah, we haven't met.
Hey, Bob.
Got it. So, Jacob, one way to look at it is Bob is stewarding a community of social innovators around the world who overlap in terms of problems that they're working on. And, we talk about, when we talked about the context of these larger ecosystems of thousands of institutions who share goals, how do they all get on the same cumulative capability upward? How do they all get the advantage? Saskia and I talk about radical collaboration. She's inspired me with that. And there's the example of the solar industry in Australia who collaborated and got each other 18 months into the future compared to the rest of the world because they cooperated better. So I think that there's this interesting intersectionality of how does every group of individuals and institutions who share problems cooperate better to all be in the future together. and have the collective agency we would expect of the future, but not of the present? And how does that become the resource that allows us to achieve all of the kinds of justice goals that Karl has raised throughout our dialogues, and all of the kinds of biodiversity goals that Raj has raised throughout our dialogue? I think that's a really interesting thread. So maybe we can invite Jacob to introduce himself, as this is his first time gathering, and then we can offer commentary on some of the threads that come up. But I think the challenge I will present to the group is, if we can be massively more cumulative with all of the folks who share our purposes, our intentions, and our problems, then we can escape the curse of hoarding problems and arrive at a solidarity of purpose of exponentially improved individual and collective agency vis-a-vis collected problems. And with that, I'll hand over to Jacob for him to introduce himself to our colleagues.
Hi guys, I'm Jacob. I was a researcher at the MIT Media Lab and Decentralized Information Group, and am really interested in how we can build tools that extend the human mind to solve problems possibly too large for any individual mind to solve. I am a crazy note taker in a slightly different format, but in the same spirit as Jerry Michalski. I really like to create public curated lists. I'd love to share those briefly. And my current focus is running a startup that builds a notebook that augments the user's intelligence. And there's a lot of things I mean by that, but one of them is, if you take a note about a person and then 2 years later you mention that person's name in a new note, it'll autocomplete, and it'll show you all of the past notes that you'd taken on that person. And not only will it show you all the past notes you've taken on that person, but it'll show you all of the notes that your team has taken on the person. So it's not just your own extended memory, but it's your team's collective memory. And finally, it sits on top of all the data sources your company has access to. So if you have a mention of some person or project or something, and if that person occurs in Crunchbase and you have access to Crunchbase, you can see that. So what I'm trying to do is just provide a new interface on top of all the different data sources in the world, to unsilo them and link them up just in time, ultimately with the personal ambition of connecting intellectual soulmates in the world. So that's my verbal intro. And
Jacob, could you just share any piece about the connection between your work on this and global problems? Because I think that's part of what this group is stewarding, is how do we address all of these collective challenges better? And I think part of what your technology orientation has been about is better cumulativity in multiple contexts, but that could include addressing collective challenges.
Yes, absolutely. So there's two aspects in which this comes together. So I'd love to share my screen if you guys want to.
Sure, for five minutes would be great.
Awesome. Let me return to this Hangout tab.
And then after that, we'll invite commentary as well as any supplemental introductions of folks so that they can offer commentary. But I want to reflect that, you know, each of us is in a context where we're trying to be cumulative with N history. And if we can be collaboratively cumulative with our collective knowledge and collective histories, we can find collective agency.
So first, as a quick comment, I totally agree. I totally agree with that. And maybe the phrasing that I arrived at that kind of expresses what Bobby's saying is, I feel like if I have an impact to help people, I ought to be consistent about it. And this is my meta project. You guys can all check it out at some point. It's systematicawesome.jacobkarl.net, and it's a list of all of the Google documents I use to connect people. And this sort of expresses my own personal mission here, independent of any software that I might build. But if I'm going to help someone, if I have a desire to help someone, I want to be honest with that desire to help someone and be systematic about it. If I'm going to help someone with chronic pain, I will create a list of resources for chronic pain, not just help them on a one-off basis. If I'm going to care about climate change and help a friend who's trying to do a climate change initiative, I'm not just going to start the I'm not just going to introduce the two people, but I'm going to start a curated list of people interested in climate change. And so before I dive into anything technical, merely the act of trying to create these Google documents maps to a reasonable domain has been invaluable to me, and I think helpful to some other people. But this is, for instance, my crew of people who are really good at, are really interested in climate change. And here's a list of high leverage points that would really make a difference in climate change. And then I've got a list of points that are not high leverage. Let's see, I've got existing projects that sound good but aren't effective, so that we can create a central global resource of all these things. And I don't care if these resources are replicated elsewhere. The point is, I'm just trying to create a document that is one level up of everything, a document that lists all the resources in our own format. So, if someone else starts making a list that's pretty complete, another person starts making a list that's pretty complete, I just want to compile that all together into a list that's really complete. Another such sub-list is alarming climate change facts. This is like a public resource. It's like, if you want to mobilize collective action, of course, the most crass way to do it is to be alarming. And so if we can keep a list of climate change facts that the general public might be alarmed by, and also be really aware of things that might be truly alarming, like that don't sound bad for the general public but are actually really bad. That's also important for climate scientists to know. So we don't go harping on things that aren't going to have the right effect. Anyway, all these lists are things that I would love to collaborate on. I also just have a bunch of notes from Zoom calls. It's a huge mess, frankly, but the point was to get all in one place. I want to demonstrate the software briefly, but again, Bobby, I want to defer if you want to jump in.
Well, I think we should also get to the rest of the group's discussion. But if you want to take just a 30 seconds or 1 minute version of that, and then we'll turn over to the rest of colleagues.
Awesome.
We do the micro version. We can always do a further version later, and I don't mean to neglect the full version of what you've done. I think there's amazing impact potential, but I'll let you share the brief recap of that for our collective awareness.
All right, so I right here have my notes on our friend Bob Fishkin, and one topic is, I'm going to say, passionate about climate change. Okay, and because climate change has been mentioned in some other note that either I've taken or my team has taken, we can see everybody who is interested in it. We can see that Jeff DePue is interested in it. We can see the wicked problem. Wicked problems. You can see other wicked problems in the world. If you want to see more info on this guy, Jeff, you can see he's a mentor for StartX. We're in StartX right now, and I'm
sorry, the video, the video's cut off. It's frozen on the screen, Jacob. So we're not seeing what you're modifying. In other words, if you're typing, it's frozen. My apologies.
Uh-oh. I see.
Maybe we need to reconnect you, and then we can also share this context because I'm sorry, it just wasn't live. But I want to, while you're getting that ready for a second, and if you pull it back up, we can let you complete that for a minute. But then I just wanted to share that the bridging here is Bob's example of all of these impact potential social innovations in the world that have impact potential, and the context of each of them reusing each other's beginnings. And if we think about everything that a startup throws out on the way to becoming a successful social innovation, we could think about all of that as a shared research for agency by all the other social innovations that share those purpose. Oh, go ahead, Jacob. We can see now.
Great. So I'm taking some notes here, and we've got the profile. These are my notes on Bobby, and I'm going to add that he's passionate about climate change. And what you notice is that climate change auto-completed because I had previously taken notes on climate change. I expand climate change. You can see that it's a wicked problem. It's related to global warming. Maybe I could say it's even redundant with. I could change that label. And it's an interest of Jeff Depew. Expand Jeff Depew. You see, hey, he's an inventor for StartX, and he's into this StartX is Stanford's startup accelerator. These are some other people who are in my notes that have participated in StartX. You can continue to expand. You can see that, for instance, Raphael Kosman, incidentally, he's a guy who's really cares about climate change, and a great person is on this list. And you can see that he's the founder of Street Code Academy and Trust Token. Expanding any one of these things, you can discover they're backed by Andreessen Horowitz. You can expand Andreessen Horowitz, and you can see all the notes that have been taken on Andreessen Horowitz in the system.
Got it. I think that folks are getting it's frozen again. So I'm just going to pause it just because it keeps cutting off. But I think that the essence of it, I think, has been conveyed, which is that what you're doing is connecting every idea or concept that has a relationship to another idea or concept into a navigable user interface where those adjacencies can be found. And I want to connect this broadly to the groups coalitioning because, you could say that there's a lot of adjacencies that we're not finding culturally. I did a search weeks ago for who in the world has systems thinking. Here, Jacob, we can go off the presentation now for a minute. We can turn back to the discussion if you like. But that what? Oh, you mean you got it? You're gonna.
I'm still.
You're keeping that. Got it. But I mean, in other words, in the world, I searched for Ikigai, IKIGAI, and I searched for systems thinking and social innovation, and one person in the world came up. I wrote that person a letter, we chatted, and found camaraderie. Same with each person has a whole number of folks who are in a level of resonance of alignment of purpose or practice or tactic where we could learn profoundly from them. So I think the thing I'll turn back to our colleagues and invite Bob and other colleagues to connect to is how do all these adjacencies come to life across the systems change sector? How do we get systems change to be as collaborative as every adjacency could reveal, as it were? Bob, did you want to comment on what you've heard or on these threads? You're on mute now. My apologies. I put everyone on mute because we were getting feedback. I apologize for that.
Oh, sure, no problem. Yeah, it's sort of how can we, make use of this collectively, right? That and then as we collectively act based on this to learn even faster. So when using this, we're all using this interface and system to build new relationships, to discover new learnings, and then report, and then as we all do that, we take action on it, and then we report back on those actions that then tells us, oh yeah, this was really a good idea doing this. So it's sort of like, people doing something together with this tool collectively can help us learn faster. Can it help us learn faster? This is obviously the question, but that's augmenting our collective intelligence. Is that?
Can every community who shares a concern for a problem learn faster by recycling everyone else's learning time. In other words, we're recycling cans, but we're not recycling time. And is it possible that we could address collective aims? Let me include other colleagues of perspective. Grant, did you want to chime in on the same? I mean, you're stewarding these 250. I put you on mute too, Grant. So sorry, everybody's on mute. But just to prevent feedback when we were doing that. But that if we have the stewarding of these collective aims, one of the aims is learning faster. How does that align to you've got this network of people that are learning too?
Yeah, no, I think it is. I mean, I think what's quite interesting is what Jacob's doing is tackling a problem and documenting it, and then making it a searchable and relatable database, which makes a lot of sense. Look, I think it's a great idea. Obviously, for us, it's what we're trying to do is keep learning and contacting. Obviously, your education just starts at a course, and you come. The course that we did at Cambridge, a lot of us I see it as sort of another way of sort of midlife crisis for people that have suddenly realized that climate change and business are not compatible at the moment, but should actually be the solution together. So I think that for us, it's applying the knowledge and learning by doing. So those are our two philosophies. So yeah, I mean, we're still learning and fantastic opportunity to what Jacob's doing. I think it's
learning by doing sounds very aligned to Saskia, what we heard in the conversations that came up in our user-centered design research. Did you want to comment on what you've heard so far from Jacob or these threads so far, Saskia?
I love Jacob's idea. I mean, I am a ridiculous note taker too, but I wish I had the intelligence behind Jacob's tool. For me, it's all manual, where I try and link ideas to people and all that sort of thing, and try and keep that. So it totally. I mean, what you were just talking about, and what Bob was talking about, like how can we bring people and ideas together to accelerate collaboration. I mean, obviously that is going to help with that, or you can see how that can help with that if we could implement that at scale. I love that idea.
Well, and I think about the folksonomy of every knowledge stack, and if you look at what Karl's done with his communities of entrepreneurs seeking to reflect different ways stakeholders and the justice to those stakeholders have been reflected. In a sense, you could say, the folksonomy of every group of subdomains of knowledge is an opportunity for collective awareness, categorization, taxonomy, and ultimately ontology of collective agency in that community. Karl, what did you think of what's been shared by Jacob in terms of cumulativity in innovation communities considerations? Or Karl, if you're not frozen.
Oh, all right. Sorry. So I guess I was thinking about the idea that it looks like a tool to connect like-minded people, so they can share their common views. But I couldn't help but think about what if you actually had people connected. How does it help them come up with better ideas or utilize things? What if you could have people who share concerns at a high level, but when it gets down to implementation of some particular thing, that just merely being aware of who's who isn't necessarily going to help create an agreement. So it seems like it's a good precursor, but when you look at what's really needed to solve big problems, there's another layer that awaits, and that is maybe how to dissect the problem so that you could come to common understanding on what's important. But every time you look at the political landscapes or the discussions that people have, how you could have very similar or identical information shown to different people, and depending on what their propensities are, they separate. They just view it differently because it's not necessarily information are lacking. They're differing in values, perhaps, at some level.
So I think what you're saying is that this is a technology for sense harvesting, for sense making, but not for deliberative dialogue, deliberative decision making, but it is a technique for cumulative awareness, perhaps, that could...
I wouldn't have put it that way, but I like how you did it.
That's all right. Well, I think we can hack a collective awareness of these hypotheticals, but I think, Mark, did you want to offer any commentary on what you've heard so far here?
You just, you and Karl just kicked me into thinking about two things. One, I would say, is the way we share knowledge very often from my side of the world is actually the art world is metaphor. And really we've kind of reduced the world in phenomena to, you know, various scenes in various contexts. And it gets sort of more poetic and more immediate when you communicate that way. I guess the other thing I was thinking about was taking these conversations so that they make real change in the world very often requires, in my life, very often requires a legislative pathway. And that's sort of the creative tension for me now with Josh working on the Center for the Study of the Force Majeure and looking at climate disruption and what it tells us about the unraveling of a world where we feel that we are apart from nature, not a part of nature. So part of what we're trying to do is to communicate to folks and organize this and enlarge the ability to communicate that if we don't start behaving like a part of nature, why nature will that last and we'll be out of a job.
Well, no, Mark, that brings up a really interesting point about the metaphor gap in systems change, which is to say that, you know, we have each of these examples that you've alluded to of, you know, the nature context. We agree people should get a dose of nature. We've looked at what is the forest bathing or what is the dose of nature required to achieve a public health goal per person. There's a metaphor of version control in code, and what we're really talking about is interdisciplinary version control, in which if there's a breakthrough in one field that affects another field, there's no, you know, carrier pigeon that arrives at the people in the other field in time for them to get the update and the memo and the message. And so, you know, for example, there's been a study that people care about their avatar more than themselves if they're a serious gamer, or not, you know, not by serious gamer in this case, I'm referring to the very active gamers, not the impact gamers. And the, you know, the reality then is maybe the way we get all of the people with nature deficit disorder to care for themselves is to get their game companies to provide their avatar some extrinsic benefit if they themselves go outside to nature. Right? Because maybe they're willing to care about their avatar if they're, you know, more than they're willing to care about themselves. That would be one kind of version control. You talk about user-centered design as a metaphor that we've had, you know, this morning, a conversation that threads together with this. You know, functional medicine has been the intersection of user-centered design, systems thinking, and medicine. Well, user-centered design and systems thinking connect to a whole lot of other fields too. You know, it turns out that there's a branch of psychology focused on user-centered design and systems thinking. It's called self-determination theory. It turns out there's a branch of economics that relates to user-centered design and systems thinking being hybridized to there too. So in other words, the interdisciplinary contextual adjacencies that are of real importance, I think, are when one field or one context has a breakthrough, and how does that cascade affect all the other people who share that problem? Maybe that's a good time to include Yangbo Yangbo, do you have feedback on this thread of how do these fields get updated when there's a breakthrough in one field? How does that become a breakthrough in all the fields for which that update has consequence?
Well, we actually touched upon this somewhat tangentially in our conversation yesterday, or Wednesday actually, but overall, I'd say in general, what you're basically saying, it's definitely true with many of the fields, because one thing you see with fields, and especially in academia, and when I was in India last year in the geography department at one of the universities I was staying, they showed a couple of posters about this precisely, where you'd be doing things that either you're advancing your field, but are you actually advancing society or the human condition at large? And in many cases, there's a distinction with it. And also both Gary Gasparov and François Chollet, both of them noted that, don't recognize Chollet, he's Google's chief AI, Kasparov, the chess master who wrote Deep Thinking. And they noted that there are problems that are good for competitions and such, for demonstration purposes, but don't really do much to move either the field or broader society forward. So, I mean, that's just my initial reflections on it.
Well, that makes me think, Yangbo, that what we're really talking about is embedded principles. In other words, the Project Management Institute has clearly not encountered self-determination theory at the level it ought to, or the last 10 project managers I've spoken to about self-determination theory would not have the expression on their faces that they've had. So in other words, there's, the example of in Taiwan, GovZero, where they created a citizen's version of each government site and said, what do we think? I mean, I wonder what the equivalent would be of agency and self-determination compatible, or a system thinking compatible community. What would they think of each of the other fields? What do they think of public policy? In a sense, any field that has discovered its own normative criteria by which to evaluate all the other fields becomes a rubric for intersectionality. But what we don't have is then turning that into a pull process in which every field that needs those tools can harness those tools. I mean, I think this comes up, Raj, why is it that the economists are only harvesting tools from, quantitative traditions and not harvesting tools from wisdom traditions, for example? Why do you have a sense of how cumulativity can be cross-tool or diverse tool in terms of social innovation embedding in disciplines each of these problems and solution contexts? Raj? Okay, I can't hear Raj, so we must not have Raj on audio. My apologies. Feedback on this same thread, Jacob, that we've come back to you with feedback on what I shared or what our colleagues have shared here?
Yes, I've been taking a bunch of notes. The first thing is about transfer learning between different fields. So I think that, well, there's a branch of math called category theory, which is not well studied in the US, but I think the UK has got on luck. I was at Oxford for a little bit. And it basically was invented as a way to find when discoveries in one mathematical field are really the same discovery as in another mathematical field. And you can discover, okay, what are the things you can, the proofs and stuff, and the things you can learn from that one field to transfer to the other field. And what I think is the one action to be taken is to sort of create not a mathematics, but at least a central web of all the ideas that there are. And it can be a flat graph. It can also be an ontology, lots of ways to go do it, such that whenever someone has a new idea, you can think, hey, you know what are all the things it really should be connected to in this really big web?
Yeah, that harmonizes with what you and I talked about several years ago. I think when I first spoke to you, I mentioned that 10 years ago, that concept paper I wrote of a global idea positioning system to position any idea as it arrives with how it relates to each of the other ideas that have been applied to that problem. And would you believe it, Jacob, Bob's been working on building such a system in a sense. Bob, did you want to chime in on this context of Jacob? You're on mute. My apologies.
Exactly what that, yeah, you're hitting a nail on the head. That's exactly what we're trying to do. So, what we have is a lot of laggard data, data on stuff that's happened. We don't have data on the change that just occurred in the current, and then the future data based on what's the likely scenario that things will happen, or systems can be accessed. And then in addition to the change data, we can use the pledge data or the idea data to say, how does this idea relate to others, either going on now or in the future? So it's sort of a repository of change data that accelerates more data about where things could go once this now that this change has happened. And we're just missing out on this whole layer that I think can be augmented by your system. Does that make sense?
Yes, as you say it, I got to bring up the visual. I'm trying to build the global idea bank, and the global idea bank is obviously a web.
Yeah, I think that there's that also, but the ideas that have actually been implemented and now have brought about a change as well.
Yes.
In the same
because
place.
Jacob, Bob's been aggregating this network of dozens of organizations that have many tens of thousands of social innovators who have piloted these things. So there's sort of the filter on the list of ideas of which of these have been tried in practice anywhere in the world, and how much have they been tried in practice anywhere in the world. And therefore, if it's been done 1,000 times, then maybe it has XYZ feasibility. And so it's sort of relative trustability by different levels of cumulative history that becomes present tense agency prospectively.
Yeah, it's made possible when people are doing things together, right? They're all going to your resource and they're putting stuff in and they're working together collectively to, radical transparency of what they're doing.
Well, that brings up, I think, the question that Raj asked Saskia in the chat of what do we mean by radical cooperation and radical collaboration if what we're identifying is that there's all these people who are on the same part of Jacob's map and Bob's map who don't know each other, don't talk to each other, and don't recognize each other's work right now. But if they were all not hoarding their own vision of the problem, but cooperating around the gap, then there might be more collective agency. Saskia, did you want to offer any? Oh, go ahead, Raj. Sorry.
Hi. Yeah, I like what you just said, Bob, about radical collaboration, and I think if we listen to the talk on how they are attempting to discover the vaccines, how the U.S. government they're attempting to work through the multiple silos, multiple industrial, let's say, approaches to vaccine development, and help to collaborate in the process. Not at the end of the process.
That's right.
And I also, and Jacob's tool also made me think. I've seen some tools, using data mining or small bits of artificial intelligence to scan all kinds of emails within pharmaceutical company, just to scan their databases, and to help then define and create new medicine or new vaccines. So there's a lot of intelligence which is in a lot of data, and applying new relationships, new semantics, new taxonomies can really be helpful in the discovery of information. But then again, building the narrative on top of that data, that takes another framing or reframing. So I think they're very interesting tools, in data science. And to what aspect that's going to be helpful, I think we would have to wait and see. You know, let Jacob spend his 10 million, and take it further and see how people are going to use it. I mean, would students using it to share knowledge and the learning experience? Would diplomats across different countries be using that, you know, to understand global issues? You know, how would people use it? And I think it's very hard to tell at the moment. And you know, this product has to be in the market, in the beta stage, and then, you know, we'll discover how people think around these ideas. So that's all. Give it back to you.
I got a thought. Seems like we're talking about two basic levels of information. One is sort of factual information, and I saw Jacob mapping there. But then there's the marketing level. It's Mark had mentioned something about art earlier on. That sort of struck me. You know, art is, we all see pictures around us or something. It's objectively something, but people respond to those images differently. They respond to different fact patterns or information. And if you really want to develop an effective means of collaboration, it's like a clap almost. You need information, it has to be shared, but you also have to figure out how to sell it, how to present it. And that's how you can get a clap. So,
well, I mean, one part of that is that there's a storytelling gap for many narratives, right? We spoke about the narrative 2 weeks ago that social innovation is perceived as a foreign concept because we don't recognize that the park in our community and the fire department in our community were social innovations, and that big history is a big history gap. I'd say that we have a big history gap for each narrative of the present that has not gotten its due in culture. Those are all narrative gaps, right? And the continuation and support of those, addressing those narrative gaps is a collective opportunity. We put a call out to the world last week to create, you know, we found 50 of the 50,000 universities in the world have a quote unquote global pro bono club, and the other 99.9% don't. So we put a call out to students at all the other ones to create a global pro bono club at all the universities that don't have one, to then cooperate on solving major collective challenges through that context, because we don't think that it should be a narrow prerogative of retirees to address global problems. They talk about the old model of decades ago was once you're retired, then you give back, right? And so, you know, what we're democratizing is the all generations, all hands on deck, all the time, too many problems for us to have the majority of the world's population on the sidelines. I spoke this morning about the service learning singularity of what happens when 500 million people realize that they're in a field that has more than 1 million people learning it, and every field with more than 1 million people learning it could be most efficiently learned solving a global problem and building on all the materials that are autodidact accessible. So I think the context for saying, how do we get all the stakeholders who are on the sidelines in the game against global problems is important. But in order for that to be a matter of their individual capability, we need to figure out a way to give each individual better odds against the interdisciplinary complexity than, you know, World War I soldiers or any of the other metaphors that we have for, you know, why each person shows up at a problem, feels overwhelmed, and runs away. I think what we need to figure out is how problems of profound complexity do not become as intimidating as Goliath would be to David if David only wins one time out of 1,000. You know, how do we turn the fundamental nature of knowledge into something that is in support of individual agency through camaraderie and collaboration against these challenges, rather than where we're each, right now I feel like we're structuring knowledge so every human is surrounded, every human gets ganged up upon by all the disciplines they don't know, and each person loses. 999 times out of 1,000, and then sometimes you get a polymath who finds their way, right? And how do we turn the human race not into laggards against modernity, by which I mean feeling always behind the disciplinary convergence, and how do we get them into synchronized with modernity in terms of their capabilities? How do we get as much agency as the grand intellectuals a few hundred years ago who felt like they could tackle all the fields because there weren't very many and knowledge was, locally relatively new? How do we get that level of agency, but for individuals against collective challenges?
Bobby, have you had a look at donut economics?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. I think it's kind of interesting in the way it maps information visually. And everything around donut economics, we know that when we've been working in those multiple silos, but the very fact of putting them together and calling it donut economics suddenly makes it seem so much more accessible.
So maybe you're saying we need a metaphor like donut economics for every other field that has a metaphor shortage vis-a-vis the integration of the cross-field update. You're saying donut economics is an example of when one field integrated the update from all the other fields.
Absolutely. And I think what Jacob's doing, that mapping. I mean, we've done those mind mapping, and this is more like a dynamic mapping. And if there's a concept built around that, similar like to donut economics, to say that this is the way you're going to visualize your collaboration. This is the way you're going to interact among multiple silo groups. It could really be helpful, and it could spearhead a lot of thinking and really drive radical collaboration.
Over to Saskia, radical collaboration. I want to give you a chance at the microphone when a concept that you've coined for my purposes and our collective purposes has been invoked. I want to give you the chance.
I like what Raj was just saying. I think it is definitely. I mean, obviously the way I see it and the way I'm trying to create radical collaboration is indeed focusing people on beyond the traditional ways of thinking and whatever is needed to get people to work together and see that by working together we can all individually achieve a lot more, as well as contribute to systems value, as well as creating a future in full stop. Like, if we do not do that, then I fear for our future. And I think visualizing it, as Raj says, donut economics is a very, very good example. And there are more examples like that, where either visually or metaphors or stories and suddenly make people understand that indeed there is a reason to work together far more than there is a reason for trying to continue on your individual path. So
and I think that reason is particularly so when people discover that their knowledge individually is not as valuable as their knowledge in coalition, because knowledge is a type of good that gains value in proportionate to the last mile of the knowledge needed for the feasibility of something real in the world. And Raj, I think this brings back to the economics of it. I think 99% of the gaps that exist could be talked about in terms of knowledge gaps, in terms of many organizations with worthwhile missions are missing some percentage of the knowledge needed to complete their aspirations in the world. And they're economically, isolated in these archipelagos, but they're not in ecosystems that allow them to fulfill those aspirations. But open to your vantage point on this.
I mean, definitely. I mean, the education system has been very, hanging on to this old structure, and we would have gone on at that speed had it not been for coronavirus. And suddenly now we're like, hey, how do we speed up? How do we gear up? And the very fact that we're having this conversation and thinking about those issues is really proof to the fact that we do need that radical collaboration, even in terms of the knowledge management and understanding knowledge and knowledge processes. And we can't go back to the textbooks, and a lot of the textbooks would have to be rewritten. A lot of the ideas were written like 300 years ago. Or maybe even 50 years ago, and all of that thinking without digitalization, without radical collaboration on the internet. So now, how does digitalization, radically speed up radical collaboration? You talked about city management, and you talk about democracy. I mean, even democracy has shifted in terms of radical collaboration among the electorate, in terms of how to vote, and even politicians are working on the internet to create radical collaboration or radical communication. So we haven't got theories for that at the moment. I mean, we've got the Facebooks of the world, we've got the Amazons, and and they're doing their own thinking. They're piling up their billions of dollars in money and going as far as they can for the ad money and for their business models. So if we talk about radical collaboration for sustainable good, or for the good of the planet, or for the good of economic thought, or social economic thought, or cultural development, I mean, we really need to rethink a lot of that. And by that I mean that knowledge is not very linear. So it's like a cloud. So we have to take different things which were previously invisible and make them visible. And they, by that very fact, helps to shape non-linearity into more like a cloud. So, and this is where we are. And, all of you guys are really smart people and really smart projects. And we can see how we are struggling with this very fact of identifying, where we are and how to shape that change process.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of our social change aspirations feel like skiing downhill at speed in terms of the level of grace and ease on a minute-per-minute basis. I think these are all extremely challenging things
Exactly.
that people on this collaboration are taking on. However, I do feel like that there is a superpower in camaraderie, that we don't have to have all the magic bullets or all the magic tools, but that there is a form. The only kind of magical thinking which is not a violation of the laws of physics is that the knowledge that you don't have and collaboration with those who do have it, when you share a purpose, can feel like magic in terms of the speed of improvisational world problem solving. And that's feasible together in cahoots with you all wonderful people. So in that spirit, I think it would be helpful to give a last round to see if folks have last commentary before we adjourn for today, because we just have 7 minutes in our allotted time. Yangbo, do you have any other feedback on the threads that have come up today for you before we wrap up today? Yangbo? Okay, it's on mute, so we can come back. If Yangbo can't hear, we can come back to him. Go ahead, Mark. Would you like to offer any commentary, closing words before we adjourn today?
No, I am grateful. I feel really well understood about how we're leaping back and forth between, that is, we at the Center for the Study of the Force Majeure and with our projects are leaping back and forth between gathering great deals of data, defining problems, and then turning and trying to get the understanding of those problems accelerated via various different kinds of communications. And we've just been working for 15 years over and over and over again to try and sharpen our communication and bring people along with the understanding that, as you say, Bobby, this is a new wave in the now that's happening. We need to be surfing now collectively. And No, just very exciting.
Phenomenal, Mark.
And
go ahead, Yangbo.
To I think more so to add there. Yes, just on top of that, earlier, and much of the past few weeks, including for those of you who tuned in during the Rethinking Economics Festival, a few sessions of those came up prominently, is in really terms of bringing this to scale, so systems change, system thinking, and all of that. I think the biggest is how to encourage whoever is even thinking about this to overcome what many can even call it a career risk of types. Several of my colleagues have mentioned the risk that otherwise perhaps individuals. So, for example, within the economics field, there's this pecking order that you do economics, that's then business school economics, and then lastly is public policy and planning economics. So many stick to a very orthodox approach about that. So now how do we get beyond that? First, mental impediment, and then, of course, changing institutions so that they are very conducive instead of very resistant to these types of innovation.
Thank you so much for that, Yangbo. And I agree that we need to talk about all the fields that are missing. We talk about the intersection of autonomy in each of these fields, there are systems thinking in each of these fields, and that it's embedding the principles that have been discovered from one field in another that advances our collective agency through the refined version of any field. Bob, did you want to offer any other commentary before we adjourn in closure?
Yeah, I think when you think about climate change, what can we do? Can we collectively lower the cost of home ownership for everyone in society? Because home ownership actually maybe is a good thing. Can we do that collectively in a way that actually reduces carbon footprint to below zero, while not ending up with yet another crisis of home mortgage disaster, right? Can we do this together as a community? With these tools, might actually be a good test of, can this be done? Because there is a value for home ownership, there's a value for lowering the carbon footprint, there's a value for doing so that is financially feasible for everyone, without what we had, which was nobody sharing any information about the loans that were being written, because they're all junk loans that were thrown to other people. The system doesn't work in that way. If it's a peer-led, we're all homeowners and home buyers. How can we, can this system be tested out that way?
Bob, I'd just like to say, sorry, I mean, we always think about, how does something become carbon neutral? But what if it became, a sequestration? What if it has a sequestration capacity?
Right.
So we also have to innovate in that direction, and not just think about how to lower the footprint of buildings, but how buildings themselves.
I'm saying, like, collectively, can we do this through housing? That's the point.
Exactly. I mean, through housing, through innovations in buildings, we can make houses and home ownership a positive experience where you can actually, be like a tree in the forest, by using your walls, your roofs, underground facilities. And anyway, just a short note. Sorry.
Jacob, last words before we adjourn.
Great.
Yes. I think that the action item is to create perhaps, or an action item proposes to create a hit list, an idea bank of projects that people should be working on, some subset of which we should be working on, and a database of all of the people who are relevant to contributing to this, both like internally and then making a more external facing database. And I just made a URL for it. at systemicchange.jacobcole.net if anyone feels like putting it on there, but we can also do it elsewhere if you prefer.
I think, Jacob, let's have you and Bob talk further, because I think there's overlaps of intentionality in what you just described, but maybe there's a way for us to be able to bring all of these intentionalities into alignment. Bob, does that sound good to you, that we can connect these threads?
Absolutely.
Terrific. I want to express gratitude for y'all's patience and creativity in this interdisciplinary process. We're going to have to adjourn here, but I want to say thank you and have a phenomenal Friday. Take care.